Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Dragiewicz, and I'm going to be talking today about how children are involved in technology-facilitated coercive control. I'd like to start by thanking the members of the CAPS project for including me in their important project and research on children's experiences of abuse following the separation of their parents. I think this is one of the most important areas of contemporary domestic violence research and practice that there is not nearly enough attention paid to at this time. I'd like to also thank the traditional owners of the lands on which I live and work here on the Gold Coast of Australia, the Coomba people. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that this is unceded land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The research that I'm talking today was funded by the eSafety Commission, and this is a unique Australian government body that pays attention to personal and interpersonal cybersecurity. The members of the research team are all listed here, and like most research, this is a team effort that wouldn't have been possible without the contributions of all the team members. The study that I'm discussing today was based on research with a number of different sources of information. We did a survey of professionals who work with domestic violence cases. We did focus groups with domestic violence specialist staff who work directly with children. We did interviews with mothers who are survivors of domestic and family violence. We did interviews with young people who had been affected by technology-facilitated abuse in the context of domestic and family violence. And we also did interviews with fathers in behavior change programs for domestic and family violence offenders. So what is technology-facilitated coercive control? Coercive control is a term that's increasingly being used in Australia to describe the social problem known as domestic violence. Coercive control is a pattern of abusive behavior that leverages patriarchal structural inequality to establish and maintain micromanagement and control of a partner's life. And this includes control and monitoring of the children as well. Coercive control can include physical violence, but it also includes a range of non-physical behaviors that are controlling, intimidating, and isolating. So when you combine those dynamics of that social problem that we call coercive control or domestic violence with technology, this is technology-facilitated coercive control. So I only have time to mention a few findings from our study today, but they really do relate very closely to the findings of the other research that the CAPS project has conducted. If you look at the cartoons that are posted on this website, you'll find that each of them relates directly to the research findings from our study. So there's quite remarkable similarities despite the great geographic distance and ostensible cultural and legal differences as well. So we found that children were heavily involved in technology-facilitated coercive control. We found that post-separation co-parenting is a very important context for this abuse. We found that most abuse involves common technologies. We found that technology-facilitated abuse is harmful to children. And we also found that identical devices, applications, and behaviors can be used either to abuse or protect. So the professionals that we surveyed for this study estimated that technology-facilitated abuse was affecting children in about 27% of domestic violence cases. Interestingly, the professionals' estimates really vary greatly depending on the context in which they worked. And the professionals' estimates range from 8% to 48%. On the low end, at the 8% estimations, we had the police and organizations that work with culturally and linguistically diverse people and immigrants. And at the high end, around the 48% mark, we had child protection and youth services that work directly with children. And I think what's interesting about these numbers is not that they necessarily accurately represent the prevalence of technology-facilitated abuse affecting children across these different contexts, but they really do show that we are not systematically asking about or screening for these behaviors yet. So the professions that should be finding out about them may not be doing so. Of the cases involving children, the professionals estimated that there were a range of types of behavior occurring. They thought that technology facilitated abuse would involve monitoring and stalking behaviors in 45% of cases, threats and intimidation in 38% of cases, and blocking communication with supportive friends and family in about 33% of cases. So I just have a couple of examples that can really illustrate what this abuse actually looks like in real life, because I think it can be difficult to picture what's actually happening based on statistics. So this quote is from Abby, one of the young people that was interviewed in the study. And Abby said, "He's logged into my messenger on Facebook. I don't know how he did it. He guessed my password. I don't know. Somehow just got into it and messaged all of my friends and read all of it. And yeah, that's the only thing he's done like that, and found out where I was by reading all my messages and stuff. I don't know. He hasn't actually like tracked me from his phone. He stupidly messaged my boyfriend when I was with my boyfriend. We were just watching a movie. None of us were on our phones. And his phone went ding, and it's all these abusive messages from me. And he's like, oh, look at this. I got onto it pretty quickly from there." This is an interesting example from Abby, a 16-year-old who was talking about the experience of technology facilitated abuse from her father post-separation. I think what's really interesting about this example is it really serves to highlight the similarities between adult abusive behavior toward their own children post-separation and the abusive behavior they engage in toward the other adult partner. In this case, we see a variety of crimes and abusive tactics being used. We see impersonation of another person, in this case, the victim, which was quite common in the cases that we heard about. We have the crime of illegally accessing someone else's account without permission. And we have the attempt to interfere in Abby's supportive relationships, in this case with her boyfriend. I think this quotation is really useful and interesting when thinking about technology facilitated abuse affecting children, because a lot of the discussion about children's involvement in domestic and family violence continues to frame it as exposure or witnessing. And this example really shows how adult abusers target their own children with the same behaviors they use to abuse their partners. Here's another example that we have from a professional who completed this survey. This professional wrote, "Child had access to gaming, and so did the father. The father pretended to be a young boy. The child assumed he was playing a game against his friend. Dad used the gaming time as a space to ask the child questions to find out when mom was going to be alone in the house. The child thought that all was innocent and answered. Dad got the info. When mom was alone, he went over to her house, beat her up, and left her very wounded." This is another really interesting example that shows how this abuser impersonated a child to grill their own child for information about the activities of the child's parent, the adult partner that was the primary target of their abuse. Again, we have impersonation going on. And we have here also the crossover between what's happening online and offline. So I think this is a really informative example of how domestic violence and abuse can happen without the knowledge of the protective parent, who wouldn't have known the child was chatting with the abusive father over the multiplayer gaming platform. And it also shows that crossover between online and real life. So one of the key issues that we found in our study was that post-separation contact around parenting served to enable ongoing abuse. Technology-facilitated contact is often used or recommended by family law professionals or family courts, or used voluntarily, and it's often assumed that it will decrease the risk of domestic violence because it's seen as standing in for the physical contact between parents. However, technology-facilitated contact creates an entirely new avenue to continue persistent and ongoing abuse and harm. So this technology-facilitated abuse has significant impacts on children. Children in domestic violence situations suffer a whole range of negative impacts. The professionals that we surveyed in our research estimated that 67% of the children that experience this type of abuse would end up having some sort of mental health issues. They estimated that 63% would experience fear, 59% would experience feelings of guilt for disclosing information to the offending parent, and they estimated that 59% would experience negative impacts on the relationship with their non-abusive parent. And again, these are all significant because sometimes the assumption continues to be made that children are only witnesses or are exposed to adult domestic and family violence and aren't harmed unless they are physically harmed in the context of physical abuse. And our research indicates otherwise. So as mentioned earlier, the technologies used to harass and abuse that came up most often in our research are really common everyday devices and platforms that many of us use on a day-to-day basis. The professionals estimated that 79% of abuse involved mobile phones, 75% involved text messages, and 59% involved Facebook. And this is significant because a lot of the discussion about interpersonal cybercrime makes assumptions that there is some sort of specialized spyware involved or that the person has to have some significant technical skills. But our research indicates that abusers have a perfectly easy time using everyday commercially available devices and applications in the service of abuse. So in sum, we found that identical devices, applications, and behaviors can be used to abuse or protect. So we found that protective parents sometimes engaged in the exact same behavior using the exact same devices as abusers use to engage in coercive and controlling abuse. So this really tells us that the specific technologies or technology behaviors are not the problem. The context and meaning of these behaviors really is everything when it comes to domestic violence and abuse. And this presents some significant challenges for measurement when people are trying to do survey research on technology-facilitated abuse, where just asking about behaviors is unlikely to provide really meaningful and usable information for us. So as a result of this, we really do need new cybersecurity models that are tailored to the interpersonal, intimate, and family contexts. Technology abuse also demands new forms and heightened collaboration between professionals, survivors, academics, technology designers, and governments if we're going to be able to effectively respond to and prevent abuse. But perhaps most importantly, this research also indicates that we really do still need to have the difficult conversations about the underlying causes of abuse, which are deeply embedded in mainstream cultures, backed up by institutions such as family law. In the context of this research, much of the technology-facilitated abuse took place in the context of communication that was ostensibly about parenting. And really strong social norms indicate to survivors of domestic violence and abuse that it's somehow harmful for their children not to have equal access to both parents. And I think this research highlights some of the shortcomings of that view and really emphasizes the need to pay attention to children's actual experiences in the context of domestic and family violence. That's primarily between the parents, or considered to be between the parents, that children have their own unique experiences that require consideration as well. So at the end here, I just have a few references in case you'd like to do some further reading, but thank you so much for your time today.